There are roughly 510 million square kilometers of surface on this planet. Of that, humans have meaningfully altered less than half. And yet within that fraction, a handful of places exist that don't follow the logic we've built our understanding of nature around. Not illusions, not photography tricks, actual geography that operates by rules that took geologists, biologists, and fluid dynamicists decades to explain. Some sit in climates where their own existence should be impossible. Others host species found nowhere else on the planet, not because they evolved in isolation by accident, but because the land itself made isolation the only viable outcome. What you'll see in this video makes every nature documentary you've watched feel like it was playing it safe.
The ground here literally pulls apart. 2 centimeters per year, 2 tectonic plates separating in slow motion beneath your feet. You can walk into the Almanagja Rift and touch both the North American and Eurasian plates at the same time. In 930 AD, Icelanders chose this exact crack in the earth to hold the world's oldest parliament, the Althing. Not by coincidence, the acoustics inside the canyon walls carry a voice without amplification. What surprises every visitor? The water in the valley is so cold and clear that coins thrown in the 1600s are still perfectly visible at the bottom, resting on volcanic rock. How does a rock shelf just hang there, 700 meters above a glacial lake, with nothing underneath it? Trolltunga is a horizontal slab of Precambrian gneiss, some of the oldest exposed rock on the planet, shaped by glacial pressure during the last ice age, roughly 10,000 years ago. The hike is 22 kilometers round trip. Most trail guides say 5 hours. Locals say 8 minimum. The last 2 kilometers involve scrambling across unmarked terrain with no guardrails, no rope, nothing. What nobody mentions beforehand: 3 people have died attempting the famous overhang photo. The queue for that shot in peak summer runs about 40 minutes. The water never actually reaches the ground. Salto Angel drops 979 meters, nearly a kilometer of freefall, but the plume atomizes completely before hitting the canyon floor, turning into mist somewhere around the 500-meter mark. It's the tallest uninterrupted waterfall on Earth, sitting inside Venezuela's Canaima National Park, accessible only by small propeller aircraft or a 2-day river canoe. What visitors don't anticipate: the Pemon indigenous communities have lived at its base for centuries and still do. They named it Karapakupai Maru long before American aviator Jimmy Angel crash-landed his plane on the summit plateau in 1937 and accidentally put it on Western maps. A fisherman from Barreirinhas once described it like this: in June, there's no desert. There's an ocean with sand walls. He wasn't exaggerating. Lençóis Maranhenses receives heavy seasonal rainfall despite looking exactly like a Saharan dune field. The impermeable rock layer beneath the sand prevents absorption, so rainwater pools between every ridge, forming thousands of freshwater lagoons up to 90 kilometers inland. What nobody tells you before arriving, the lagoons disappear almost entirely by November. The window is roughly May through September. Local guides navigate entirely by dune shape. There are no marked trails, no signage, nothing. Getting genuinely lost here is easier than it sounds. The smell hits before anything visual registers. Dry resin, salt wind, something faintly medicinal. Then you see the trees. Dragon blood trees with canopies shaped like inverted umbrellas, trunks straight up, branches spreading flat above like a frozen explosion. Socotra has been isolated from the African and Arabian mainlands for roughly 6 million years. Around 37% of its plant species exist nowhere else on Earth. Marco Polo mentioned it in 1290. Arab traders called it the island that smells like medicine. What surprises every first visitor, the Socotri people have no written language. Their botanical knowledge, which plants treat which conditions, exists entirely in oral tradition, passed person to person since before recorded history. How does a volcanic crater hold two completely different colored lakes sitting side by side, separated by a single narrow ridge? The twin lakes of Sete Cidades in the Azores sit inside a caldera formed roughly 15,000 years ago. Their distinct green and blue tones come from differing algae concentrations and light refraction angles, not separate mineral sources as most visitors assume. The ridge between them is barely wide enough for a road. But the story that locals actually tell involves a Portuguese king's daughter and a shepherd, forbidden from meeting, each crying into their own lake. The green one, they say, holds her eyes. The blue one, his. The legend predates the geological explanation by several centuries. There are 2,000 natural stone arches inside a single park the size of Los Angeles. Arches National Park in Utah sits on a massive underground salt deposit that has been slowly dissolving for 300 million years. The ground above it buckles, cracks, and eventually collapses into fins, then windows, then arches. Delicate Arch, the one on Utah's license plate, stands 16 meters tall and is entirely freestanding. No surrounding rock, just open sky on all sides. What the photographs never communicate: you hike 3 miles across exposed, slick rock with no shade to reach it. Most people arrive mid-afternoon in July. The surface temperature of that sandstone regularly exceeds 70 degrees Celsius. A Dutch lieutenant named Stein van Hensbroek heard rumors in 1910 from local fishermen. Stories of a buaya darat, a land crocodile, massive, fast, and venomous. He went to check. He shot one, measured it at 2.1 meters, and sent the skin to Batavia. Nobody believed him until a zoologist arrived with proper documentation in 1912. Komodo dragons have been on this island for roughly 4 million years. Their saliva contains over 50 strains of bacteria, and recent research confirmed venom glands in the lower jaw. What guides don't advertise openly, the dragons actively hunt humans on occasion. Park rangers carry forked wooden sticks, not rifles. The sticks, they'll tell you, work better. The sound reaches you before the mist does. A low, constant roar that vibrates through your chest somewhere around 300 meters out. Up close, the Horseshoe Falls moves 168,000 cubic meters of water per minute. What most visitors don't realize standing there, they're watching about half the original flow. Since 1950, the US and Canadian governments have diverted the other half through underground tunnels into hydroelectric stations before it ever reaches the rim. At night, between November and March, the falls are shut down almost entirely for maintenance. The riverbed below, fully exposed, looks nothing like what anyone expects. Just dark, wet rock and silence. How does a perfectly symmetrical column of rock rise 386 meters straight out of flat Wyoming prairie with no mountain range anywhere near it? Devil's Tower is a laccolith, magma that pushed upward into softer sedimentary rock roughly 50 million years ago, cooled slowly underground, then contracted into those distinctive hexagonal columns as the surrounding rock eroded away over millennia. There are 1,267 columns total. But the story most visitors miss entirely. The tower is sacred to at least 20 Native American tribes, including the Lakota, who call it Bear Lodge. Every June, climbers are asked to voluntarily stop ascending out of respect for ongoing ceremonies at its base. Roughly half comply. The water running through Salto del Agrio is acidic enough to dissolve metal over time. pH levels measured as low as 2.3, roughly equivalent to vinegar. The Agrio River originates directly from the Copihu volcano crater lake in Neuquén, Argentina, picking up sulfuric compounds the entire descent before plunging 20 meters over basalt shelves into a burnt orange pool. No fish, no vegetation near the banks. The surrounding rock is stained yellow and rust red from mineral deposits. What makes it genuinely disorienting? The landscape looks almost tropical from a distance, lush Patagonian forest framing the falls on both sides. You don't register the chemical smell until you're close enough that you probably shouldn't be. In 2016, a fisherman near El Nido described finding a lagoon that wasn't on any map, accessible only by swimming through a low rock gap at exactly low tide, roughly a 4-meter underwater passage. That kind of discovery still happens regularly on Palawan. The island chain stretches 450 kilometers through the Sulu Sea, containing the Puerto Princesa subterranean river, 8.2 kilometers of navigable underground river flowing directly into the South China Sea, with a full marine tidal section inside the cave. What guidebooks understate, the island's interior remains largely unmapped. Indigenous Batak communities in the Northern Highlands still practice rotational forest farming on land that has never been formally surveyed by any government agency. The wind off the Cabot Strait hits the Cape Breton cliffs at roughly 80 kilometers per hour on a calm day. Not a storm, just Tuesday. Pollett's Cove sits at the end of a 9-kilometer coastal hike through Nova Scotia wilderness with no trail markers after the first kilometer. The sea arch itself is sandstone, carved by 10,000 years of Atlantic tidal pressure. No ferry, no road, no facilities. What makes it genuinely unusual? A single family homesteaded this cove in complete isolation from 1947 until the 1970s, accessible only by boat or that unmarked coastal path. Their abandoned structures are still partially standing. Most hikers walk past the foundation without recognizing what it is. Why does the lagoon stay that specific shade of turquoise regardless of cloud cover, tide, or time of day? The color comes from the coral sand substrate reflecting light upward through extremely shallow water. Average depth inside the barrier reef is just 30 meters, often far less. The reef itself is a fringing structure left behind as the volcanic peak slowly subsides into the Pacific, a process that has been ongoing for roughly 7 million years. Eventually, Bora Bora will be an atoll, then nothing. What most visitors never hear, French Polynesia charges a departure tax specifically because the territory's infrastructure costs are entirely unsustainable at current tourism volumes. The island has 10,000 permanent residents and receives 120,000 tourists annually. For most of the year, Caño Cristales looks like any other river in the Colombian Llanos. Clear water, unremarkable rock. Then, between July and November, the riverbed turns red, yellow, green, blue, and black simultaneously. The color comes from Macarinia clavigera, a rare aquatic plant that blooms only when water temperature, depth, and light conditions align within a narrow window. The Serranía de la Macarena sits at the convergence of 4 distinct ecosystems: Amazon, Andes, Savanna, and Eastern Plains. Access was closed entirely between 2004 and 2009 because FARC controlled the surrounding jungle. Park rangers still carry radios tuned to military frequencies. The trail system was built after the ceasefire,